The knock on my door that morning didn't sound ordinary. It was shaky, like the hand of someone carrying bad news. When I opened it, my neighbor stood there, soaked from the rain, his eyes red like he'd been crying for hours. He held a folded piece of paper the way a man holds something that's already broken. "He sold me the land," he whispered. At first, I didn't understand. Not really. I thought maybe it was a misunderstanding, a boundary line, or some paperwork. But when he said my son's name, the world under my feet turned cold. My own son, my blood. He had gone behind my back, sold a piece of my land to the man who trusted me most. The neighbor's voice cracked as he told me how he spent everything he had, how he believed my son when he said he had the right to sell it. I could feel my fists tighten, my jaw lock, my heartbeat pounding in my ears like thunder waiting to strike. But I didn't raise my voice. I didn't curse. I didn't even blink. Because some storms don't need thunder to destroy everything. Some storms begin in silence. And on that cold, rainy morning, I decided my silence would be louder than anything my son had ever heard. "Hello there, my friend. My name's Walter, and this old voice has a few stories left in it. I know you're probably sitting somewhere warm, maybe with a cup of coffee in your hand, wondering how a man like me ended up in a storm like this. But before I tell you how it all unfolded, let me say this. It means a lot to have you here, listening. Sometimes the loudest battles happen in silence, and it's good to have someone to share it with. You know, growing older teaches you that people don't always see your worth. Some folks look at gray hair and think it means weakness, but they forget. These wrinkles came with lessons they can't find in any book. Tell me down in the comments. Has anyone ever dismissed you because of your age? Or treated you like your voice didn't matter? I read every word, and trust me, your stories mean something here. So sit back. Let me take you through the day. I learned that even betrayal from your own blood can be met with quiet strength. I've lived on this land my whole life, built it with my hands, raised a family on it. To most people around here, I've got the picture-perfect story. A proud father, a hard-working son, a close-knit neighborhood. My wife, bless her heart, passed years ago, but she made this house a home. The kind of place where Sunday dinners smelled like roasted chicken and laughter filled every corner. At least that's what it looked like from the outside. My boy grew up running through these fields, his hands dirty with soil, his eyes full of dreams. Folks in town would smile and say, "That's a good son you've got there, Walter. You raised him right." And I'd smile too, because for a long time I believed it. But what they couldn't see was the distance growing between us. The way his eyes stopped lighting up when he looked at this land. The way he started talking more about money than family. I noticed how his visits grew shorter, his patience thinner. Neighbors saw father and son bonded by hard work. I saw cracks forming, quiet cracks that no one else could hear. The neighbor who came to my door that morning, he'd known us for decades. A kind man, honest, simple, the kind who still believes a handshake means something. To him, my son was the boy who grew up next door. He didn't see the man who had learned to hide behind polite smiles. I guess that's the thing about betrayal. From the outside, everything looks solid. But inside, the rot starts long before anyone smells it. When people talk about land, they think about fences and boundaries. But to me, this soil has always been more than dirt. It's the story of my life, written without ink. When my wife and I were young, we didn't have much. Just a small wooden house with a leaking roof and a patch of rough ground. I worked sunrise to sunset, broke my back planting those first crops, patching those walls, and praying we'd make it through another winter. Every inch of this farm has felt my hands, my sweat, and sometimes my blood. When other men were out drinking on weekends, I was digging irrigation trenches with a shovel I bought secondhand. When my boy was born, I remember holding him under the oak tree out back. That oak became our anchor. It was where I taught him how to walk, where I showed him how to plant his first seed, where I promised my wife we'd build a future that would last long after we were gone. That tree still stands tall behind the house, its roots tangled deep into the same ground I gave everything for. It's the heart of this land. I kept working long after my knees started to ache and my hands began to shake because I wanted to leave something behind. Not just for him, but for all the stories that began here. That's why what he did cut deeper than a knife. He didn't just sell dirt. He tried to sell everything I've ever built. Everything his mother and I bled to protect. That oak tree has seen me at my strongest and my weakest. And that morning, when the neighbor told me what happened, I swear it felt like even the wind in those branches had gone quiet. The first cut doesn't always come from a knife. Sometimes it slips in quietly, disguised as a careless word. A week before the neighbor knocked on my door, my son and I were sitting at the kitchen table. The same table I built with my own hands 40 years ago. I had laid out the old deed papers, wanting to show him how I planned to pass the land down properly, clean and fair. He didn't even look at them. He leaned back in his chair, scrolling through his phone, tapping his finger like my words were nothing more than background noise. I remember clearing my throat and saying, "Son, this land, it's your legacy. One day, it'll be yours to protect." He didn't smile. He didn't even look at me. He just sighed, the kind of sigh that stings because it says more than words ever could. Then he muttered, "You act like this place is gold, Dad. It's just land. Dirt. Nobody wants to live on some broken old farm forever." He laughed after he said it. A short, hollow laugh that hit harder than a slap. I sat there, my fingers still on the deed, feeling that sentence sink into me like cold water down my spine. He didn't notice the way I stared at him. Or maybe he did, and he didn't care. I swallowed that moment like a bitter seed. I didn't argue, I didn't raise my voice, but I remember every word he said, every flick of his wrist, every inch of that distance he carved between us. And I knew then, something inside him had changed, something I couldn't reach anymore. The thing about betrayal is that it never happens all at once. It starts small, like a hairline crack in a wall you've spent your life building, and then, when you're not looking, it spreads. After that talk at the kitchen table, things shifted. I started noticing little ways he began treating this place and me like both were already buried in the past. At Sunday dinner, when I told him to set the table, he laughed and said, "I won't be living here much longer, Dad. Why bother learning old habits?" His voice carried that sharp edge, the kind that cuts without raising volume. He used to thank me for every meal. Now he just chewed with his eyes on his phone, like I was a stranger in my own house. A few days later, he brought a real estate agent to the edge of my land. I watched from the porch as they stood near the old oak, pointing and talking like it already belonged to him. They didn't see me standing there, gripping the railing tight enough to make my knuckles pale. The agent smiled, he nodded, and I swear a part of the air around that tree changed. Then there was the night he went into my study without asking. I walked in and found the safe door open, the one where I kept my deed and a few personal papers. He pretended he was just looking for a pen, but he left the light on, and I noticed the folder wasn't in the same place. That's when the pit formed in my stomach. A quiet, heavy weight that told me he wasn't just daydreaming anymore. He was taking steps. He didn't shout. He didn't steal outright. He chipped away piece by piece. Disrespect at dinner, greed in the yard, fingers where they didn't belong. I said nothing. I didn't confront him. Not yet. Because when a storm's coming, you don't rush it. You let the clouds gather. You let the wind build. You wait until the thunder speaks for you. It started with whispers, not loud enough to call a warning, but just enough to make my stomach tighten. One night, as I walked down the hall, I heard my son talking on the phone behind the closed door of my study. His voice was low, sharp, the way people talk when they're making plans they shouldn't. I stood there for a few seconds, listening to fragments. Words like buyer and deal slipped through the crack under the door. I didn't move. I just memorized the sound of it. A few days later, I noticed something else. The folder where I kept my documents wasn't sitting the way I left it. My hands may shake these days, but my memory hasn't gone anywhere. That folder was shifted, the latch wasn't aligned, and one of the envelopes inside looked like it had been pulled out and shoved back in a hurry. My son swore he hadn't touched anything. I didn't call him a liar. I just nodded and watched the way his eyes darted away. Then the bank called. Not for me, but asking about a property inquiry tied to my land. I told them I hadn't filed anything. The man on the other end sounded confused. That confusion told me enough. I began noticing more. Missing bills from the counter, legal pamphlets left in the trash, his car parked late at night outside places it didn't used to go. My son was moving in shadows, the kind of shadows that grow darker the more light you shine on them. I didn't confront him, not yet. You don't chase a snake when it's circling. You wait for the strike and you aim carefully. I didn't have proof then, but I knew it was coming. I could feel it pressing against the walls of this house, getting closer with each passing night. Betrayal has a sound. It's quiet, like the soft rustle of paper when you're not supposed to hear it. That night, the house was still. The rain tapped against the window, slow and steady. I walked into my study and something in the air felt wrong. My son had left earlier, too quickly, too tense. On the desk, a corner of a folder was sticking out from the safe. I knew that folder like I knew the lines on my own hands. I opened it slowly, careful not to disturb a single paper more than I had to. That's when I saw it. A copy of my deed with my name scratched over in black ink and his name sloppily written in its place. A fake signature. No seal, no approval, just greed dressed like ownership. My jaw clenched as I traced the pen strokes. He didn't just dream of taking it, he was already trying to make it real. I dug deeper and found a printed agreement. My son had already promised a buyer a piece of my land. A down payment had been made. My land was being sold while I was still breathing. That was the moment my heart didn't break. It hardened. I didn't yell. I didn't call him. I didn't storm out. I folded those papers slowly, tucked them back into the safe behind my own documents, and locked it with shaking hands. I sat in the dark for a long time, staring at the old oak outside. That tree had seen everything. My youth, my sweat, my promises. And now it watched me discover what my son had done. I whispered nothing to the night, because sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's strategy. You know, when I held those papers in my hand, my chest felt heavy, but my face stayed calm. That kind of hurt doesn't scream. It just sits in your ribs and burns slow. I could have stormed into his room that night. I could have yelled. I could have thrown everything on the table and asked him how he found it so easy to betray the man who raised him. But I didn't. I sat there in the dark, listening to the wind shake the branches of that old oak outside, and I made a choice. A quiet one. But let me ask you something. If it were you, if someone you loved, someone you built your life around did something like this, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent? Let them dig their own hole? Or would you have confronted them right then and there? Tell me down in the comments. I want to hear your thoughts, your gut reactions. Because silence can be power, but it can also be a wound. The night everything started to shift wasn't loud. It wasn't some big explosion. It was dinner. Just me, my son, and a plate of food that tasted like ash because I already knew what he'd done. The room was warm, but the air between us was ice. He came in late, smelling like cheap cologne and big plans. He sat down like he owned the place, like this house, this land, this life was already his. He didn't waste time. Between mouthfuls, he said it like he was announcing something I should be proud of. "Dad, you should start thinking about moving out," he said. "This land could actually make real money if someone else handled it. You've had your time here, it's mine now." I stared at him. I didn't blink. He mistook my silence for weakness. He pushed harder. "You're getting old. You don't need all this space. I can sell it off, build something new. I've already got people interested." He leaned forward then, lowering his voice like he was doing me a favor. "If you just sign it over, it'll be easier for everyone. No fighting, no mess." The fork in my hand felt heavier than it should. His voice filled the kitchen. We know, the same room where I once watched him blow out birthday candles with frosting on his cheeks. Now, he was trying to push me out like an old chair he no longer needed. I didn't yell. I didn't break. I just placed my fork down carefully, wiped my hands, and looked at him. He wanted a fight. He wanted to see me desperate. But I gave him nothing. That silence unsettled him. I saw it in the twitch of his jaw, the flicker in his eyes. He didn't know it yet, but the ground beneath him had already started to crack. I'd let him build his confidence high enough to fall hard. And the fall was coming. A few days after that dinner, the air between us had changed. He walked through the house like a man who believed the crown was already on his head. But I'd spent too many years learning the weight of silence to hand anything over easily. I waited for the right moment, And it came one gray afternoon when he walked into the kitchen with that same cocky grin. I was sitting at the table, not with my usual coffee, but with a single envelope lying flat in front of me. He saw it before he saw my eyes. "What's that?" he asked, pretending he didn't care. But his voice cracked, just slightly around the edges. That's when I knew I had him. I didn't answer right away. I just turned the envelope slowly between my fingers, making sure he saw the edge of the paper inside. It wasn't the whole proof, just a piece of it. A printed line from the deed, a signature that wasn't his. Something small enough to look like a whisper, but sharp enough to cut. "You've been busy," I said quietly. His shoulders stiffened. That grin faded a little. "I don't know what you're talking about," he shot back, too quickly. His hands went into his pockets the way liars hide their nerves. "No," I said. "I think you do." For the first time, his confidence wavered. It was in the way his eyes flicked to the envelope and back to me. He didn't know how much I knew, and that uncertainty started to shake the ground he'd been so sure of. I didn't give him the letter. I didn't reveal the signatures or the forged document. I just smiled. Small, quiet, the kind that doesn't reach the eyes. I stood up, tucked the envelope back into the drawer, and left the room. Letting someone stew in their own fear is sometimes louder than shouting. And he was starting to sweat. The day of the hearing came wrapped in silence. No music, no chatter, just the soft scuff of shoes against the polished floor of that courthouse. My son walked in wearing a cheap suit and a grin that didn't belong to a man, but to a wolf that thought he had already eaten. He didn't even look at me. He nodded at the lawyer he hired, all slick talk and empty confidence. The neighbor sat in the back row, hands clenched, face tight. He had lost his savings because of this. He had trusted my family. When the judge called the case, my son's lawyer was quick. Too quick. He talked like everything was already signed and sealed. Spoke about inheritance expectations and verbal transfers like they were facts. My son sat there with his chin up, as if he was already holding the keys. But what he didn't know was that the envelope I'd tucked away weeks ago wasn't the only thing I had. I'd spent quiet nights gathering everything, every deed, every clause, every notarized paper with my name carved deep in ink. Then came my turn. I stood slowly, steady on my old legs, and placed a single file on the table. The room shifted when the judge opened it. Inside was the original deed, untouched, and a freshly updated will signed and sealed months earlier. It left the land in a trust, not to him, but to the community farm board. A decision I'd made quietly after the first signs of his greed. And beneath that will, a recording, clear as daylight. His voice whispering in my study, "He's old. He won't even notice until it's done." The lawyer's face fell first, then his. His grin crumbled like ash under rain. His eyes darted to me, wide, searching for mercy. But I had none left to give. The judge's tone was steady as a hammer. Fraud, forgery, invalid sale. The land wasn't his to touch. It never had been. He tried to speak, tried to twist it, but the proof spoke louder than any lie he could muster. And in that moment, in front of the neighbor, the town, and the law itself, his empire built on lies fell apart. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even look at him as the papers were read, because the truth didn't need me to fight for it anymore. It stood taller than both of us. For a moment after the judge's words dropped, the whole courtroom turned into a still photograph. No one moved. No one even breathed too loudly. My son sat frozen in his chair, the same chair he'd walked into so proud, now looking too big for him. His lawyer's hands dropped from the table like someone had cut the strings. The neighbor covered his mouth with his hand, like a man trying to keep his heart from leaping out. The judge didn't need to shout. The law didn't need to roar. It only needed to speak once. Fraud voided the sale. Every cent the neighbor paid would be returned. My land remained mine, untouched. The son I raised, the boy who used to run through those fields barefoot, had been exposed for what he'd done. His greed had stripped him bare, not me. My son's face was pale, the kind of pale that isn't just fear, but realization. Realization that he'd dug his own grave with ink and arrogance. He didn't look at me at first. He just stared at the floor, jaw trembling, breathing uneven. Then finally, he lifted his eyes, and in that look, I saw not a man, but a boy who finally understood what it means to lose something you thought you already owned. The neighbor nodded slowly in my direction. Not out of victory, but out of respect. He didn't need to say a word. Neither did I. The truth had already spoken louder than anything we could add to it. As the judge closed the file and the clerk began to clear the room, I stood. No gloating, no triumph. Just the quiet weight of justice settling where it belonged. Order wasn't restored through shouting or fists. It was restored through proof, through patience, through silence. And in that silence, my son's empire of lies collapsed, not with a bang, but with the sound of nothing at all. I've learned something in my years on this earth. You don't have to shout to win a war. Sometimes patience is louder than rage, and truth is sharper than any blade. My son thought age made me weak. What he didn't understand is that time doesn't weaken a man who built his life on honesty. It hardens him. It teaches him when to speak. And when silence does the talking for him. Land can be sold, money can be spent, but respect and loyalty, once broken, don't come back easy. I didn't destroy him. His own greed did. All I did was wait for the truth to stand up on its own feet. Thank you, truly, for staying with me through this story. It's not easy talking about betrayal, especially when it comes from your own blood. But knowing you're out there listening makes the weight a little lighter. You've walked every step with me, from the first knock on that rainy morning to the silence in that courtroom. Now I want to hear from you. If someone you loved betrayed your trust like that, would you stay silent and let the truth speak for itself? Or would you confront them head on? There's no wrong answer. Your story matters here, and I read every word. If this story spoke to you, if it made you feel something, don't forget to leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs to hear it. I've got more stories to tell. Stories of quiet strength, hard lessons, and the kind of justice that doesn't always make noise. And before you go, let me say this from my heart. Stay strong, stay wise, stay blessed.